Francine Dutrasac, and I have the privilege of welcoming you to a two-part webinar entitled English Language Development for Multilingual Learners within an MTSS Framework. Today's webinar will focus on elementary MLLs and multilingual learners, and next week we will focus on secondary MLLs. In order to receive, if you are a state of Pennsylvania teacher, in order to receive Act 48, you do not need to attend both webinars. You are will receive Act 48 if you attend one or the other, or both of them for that matter. I have the privilege of doing the facilitation of this webinar with my two colleagues, Ana Saint de la Peña and Paula Zucker. As you know, the work we do is within, the webinar one is, has a Google folder with handouts, and it can be found at that tiny URL link. And if you would take a picture with your phone, it might be the easiest way to remember it so that you can download it. And Paula Zucker will also put it in the chat for you. The work that we do is within the Patton's mission. The mission of the Pennsylvania Training and Technical Assistance Network is to support the efforts and initiatives of the Bureau of Special Education and to build the capacity of local educational agencies to serve students who receive special education services. PD's commitment is to a least restrictive environment. Our goal for each child is to ensure individualized education program teams begin with the general education setting with the use of supplementary aids and services before considering a more restrictive environment. We have created a Mentee, and so what I would like you to do is to use your phone. This is probably the easiest way to participate, is to use your phone. And we will do two Mentee polls. So if it's going to be the same link, but we will stay in the Mentee for two different questions. So if you go to mentee.com and then put this code 2837-0810, we would like to know who is in our audience. We've created a list here, and if it is, we just want to know who's in our audience at this point. So here comes the Mentee. And it's who is in our audience today. It looks like a whole lot of ESL teachers are in our audience at this point. Give you a chance to participate. There's 116 of you, so give you a chance to go to mentee.com and add the code 2837-0810. Wait a little bit longer. All right. So this is just to get a sense of who is in our audience. It looks like it's a whole lot of other, and which is not so good because it's not giving us a sense of who they are, but I am thinking that many of you are from intermediate units, which is a Pennsylvania entity that is couched between the state and the local educational agencies. So we're going to move to the second one. So the second mentee is asking you, where are you located? We do know that people have registered from Pennsylvania, other states, and even other countries. So we would like you to fill that up. So Exton is in Pennsylvania. And so I see lots of Pennsylvanian at this point. Some in Maryland, New Jersey. It's going too fast. I'll wait. Ladies, if you see anything, oh, Saskatoon, Saskatchewan, welcome. That's my country of origin, for whoever that is. Well, you are your roots. So, oh, I see Canada. That doesn't make it very regional, but I'll take it. I see Saskatchewan here. Okay. So the majority.
I see Philadelphia.
Yes.
Yeah.
My city of origin.
Yes, but I actually see that Pennsylvania is the biggest representation, which makes sense. And then Philadelphia seems to be the next. But look at Harrisburg and Souderton. That means there's more than one person that is representative there. So anyway, I love Mentee. I think they're fun, and it's just trying to create some kind of engagement from.
I see Allentown. I see Allentown also.
Okay, I'm going to go back to the PowerPoint now. Thank you for participating. So, what are our outcomes for today? Analyze the complexity of language and literacy development for elementary multilingual learners. We want to connect it to the 2020 WIDA English Language Development Standards. For those who are, Maryland, I know it is a WIDA state. I'm not sure about New Jersey. And Canada, the provinces have their own standards. So this may not apply to you, but it is a really good framework. It's just been released in December, so we're not going to be going deep in the standards, but just to connect the standards to evidence-based literacy development for multilingual learners. And the last one is we are one of our participant outcomes is to apply evidence-based practices for multilingual learners within an MTSS framework. I don't know, for those of you who have attended some of our webinars, in Pennsylvania, we often referred to the students as English learners. And WIDA has moved to calling them multilingual learners because it's a more equitable, it's recognizing the assets that they bring to learning. So we are at Patton transitioning towards using the word multilingual learners, but we want to apologize ahead of time if we use English learners inadvertently. It's because we've been using that term for many years, ever since ESSA came along. So the work that we do at Patton is within an MTSS model. And today we will focus on Tier 1 specifically, but as we look at the framework as a whole, it holds potential for multilingual learners as a mechanism for making data-informed decisions, identifying and meeting the needs of multilingual learners, and reliably identifying the students that may be having learning difficulties. So when you look at the left-hand side, we're looking at academic systems. And all of those systems are within an equitable access to content for all students. So in Tier 1, core instruction matters. It has to be appropriate, evidence-based, reading instruction and interventions specifically designed for multilingual learners. To help you with that, you would have to go to the Institute for Educational Sciences. Their practice guide will support that. Teachers in Tier 1, or where core instruction occurs, have to be culturally responsive. Realize that students come with a cultural, a linguistic, an experiential lens that they bring to learning. It's important to ensure that instruction is culturally relevant, that it makes sense to them, that it's linked to what is familiar to them. Provide them with mirrors, windows, and even sliding doors, which means remove all the barriers that prevent them from learning. Collaboration in Tier 1 is paramount and is often missing. Just recently, a report was just released in April of 2021 saying that collaboration is still happenstance in many parts of the country, if not the world, where the ESL teacher is meeting the content teachers in the hallway rather than in a scheduled manner. Professional development is lacking. The ELA teacher has an understanding of literacy and maybe not so much of multilingual learners. And it could be vice versa, where the ESL teacher is not teaching literacy, and rightfully so. They are ELD instructors, instructors teaching English language development and not focusing so much on literacy per se. And finally, appropriate assessments, screening tools, and progress monitoring tools that are considering an EL population or multilingual population in their development and implementation, using screeners and progress monitoring tools that are that have been normed, that are valid and reliable for that population. Educators need to understand first and second language literacy development so that they can consider language proficiency levels for identification and interventions. On the right-hand side are the behavioral systems. I'm not going to go too far there, but there are pieces here that need to be considered on the academic side, and it's the two bullets at the bottom that are in blue. The acculturation process for multilingual learners. When you have English multilingual learners that have just arrived, they're newcomers to Pennsylvania, they will be going through acculturation, understanding how to behave, how to maneuver schools and communities and friendships and sense of belonging. And those are really important to consider in when we consider the academic piece. The other piece is to realize that families and communities want to engage, want to partner with schools, but we need to be cognizant that they may need language, that there may be language barriers or even cultural barriers to their engagement, and facilitate that engagement by our practices. Paula in this section will be talking with us about the importance of knowing our students. Paula?
An essential component in our teaching is knowing your students. It's actually, in my eyes, a prerequisite for teaching our multilingual learners. And in fact, any of our learners. We must know each individual student. What essential components must be included in our collection of background information for each of our students? So first, we look at their age, of course, their grade level, and their country of origin. Are they born in the United States? Many of our multilingual learners are born in the United States. What is their language background? What is their educational background? Their acculturation status? How many years have they been in the language instruction educational program? These are all very essential components to understand. What is their level of mobility within our country, within our state? What is their homelessness status? Actually, I received a notification today in my email, and that was from Research for Action. Actually, in the current Research for Action, May 2021 publication, it states that close to 3,000 students were identified as experiencing homelessness in Allegheny County alone, public schools, during the 2018-19 school year, which actually equals 2% of the total student population. Homelessness rates have been growing in recent years, as we all know, and lost income due to COVID-19 is likely to bring even more students to the point of housing and educational instability. How we address this crisis is crucial. Also, we look at the students who may be limited or who may be experiencing limited or have experienced limited or interrupted education as SLIPes. Is the student a refugee? Is the student an immigrant, a migrant? Is the student a long-term English learner? How many years has the English learner or multilingual learner be in the LIEP? Has the student suffered trauma? Is the student an unaccompanied youth? And certainly the numbers for these last 2 points are probably going to be increasing with the number of students who are coming into our Commonwealth. Next. We also must look at the WIDA Access for ELS individual student report. We need to look carefully at the specific sections separately, looking at listening, speaking, reading, and writing. So we're not just looking at the composite score, we're looking at all of the individual pieces so that we know where to focus our instruction to the needs of the individual student. We need to know the literacy level in the student's native language, their family background, and the funds of knowledge that they bring with them. So what do they bring with them from their cultural and family backgrounds? How can we as educators enhance our teaching by drawing upon the richness that our students bring with them, their assets? So is our teaching asset-based? What they bring with them, with their bodies of knowledge, their cultural ways of interacting, is our teaching environment actually, as I said, asset-based? What are these students' outside school responsibilities, their employment and family responsibilities? Do our students have to go to work before school or after school? What were they doing the night before they came to class? And what are they doing on weekends? What are those responsibilities? And how do they affect their learning and our teaching? What are their family obligations? Many of our students, I know based on my own personal knowledge as a teacher, have been pulled out of school several days in order to go to different appointments with their parents, with their families, to act as interpreters. What if they have an individualized education plan? What do we know about that plan? And what are their attendance patterns as well? All very important points to know when we're planning to teach our important students. Next. So Aida Walke, who is a very well-known educator in our field, has stated very succinctly the information that you see in this slide. How do we maximize outcomes in the education of our multilingual learners? When planning our instruction, do we strategically seek to engage them in more complex, interactive, and carefully constructed activities with the goal of bringing them to realize their full potential, with the ability to make contributions within their academic and civic environments? We must always seek to amplify and not simplify their instructions. Next. Multilingual learners are perceived and treated as capable, legitimate participants in our classrooms when we seek to have them succeed in their goals. So how we address their importance in our classrooms is of high importance. They succeed when they engage in intellectually demanding interactions that have been deliberately planned and crafted and scaffolded by our teachers. We need to ensure that the scaffolds are in place and that the goals and expectations are high. They succeed when they engage in high challenge, high support tasks that provide them with multiple points of entry into the academic community. How do we prepare them to engage in these tasks? How do we prepare them for success? What are the expectations and goals? Next, Francine.
So now that we've learned a little bit the importance of knowing our students, what do we do with that? And it's the segue to using the framework where we're looking at English language proficiency, English language development over time. We have created a Google folder with handouts. If you go to that tiny URL, you will find the PowerPoint. You will find a copy of the WIDA ELD English Language Development Framework, the 2020 version, the December 2020 version, and you will see another handout that we will be using later today. So now that we have an understanding of the importance of knowing our students, let's look at the WIDA ELD standards as a tool to develop language, to develop and make connections to literacy development. As I said, the WIDA ELD standards were released in 2020. They build on ideas and concepts from previous editions, but there's a big there has been several changes that we will address here. They are focusing on the latest theory, the latest policy and practice. They're also incorporating ideas and feedback from teachers around the world. They comply with federal law under ESSA and also serve as foundations for systems that foster students' engaged, interactive learning and collaborative educator practice. By the way, the Pennsylvania Department of Education is making training opportunities available to LEAs beginning in this spring, regarding the new ELD standards. Would recommend that you check the ESL portal, and the address is eslportalpa.info. Paula, if you could put that in the chat for those who may not be familiar with it, eslportalpa.info. And they will be listing the state-sponsored training. Also, please check the WIDA website. Just Google WIDA, all capital letters, and English language proficiency, English language development standards framework, and you will find a whole lot of webinars that you could be attending. And PDE will also be releasing more information and communicate directly with LEAs when updates are made available. So what are the big ideas for the 2020 edition? Equity of opportunity and access, integration of content and language, collaboration among stakeholders, and a functional approach to language development. Let's tease that out a little bit. Equity for multilingual learners has been WIDA's philosophy. WIDA's philosophy has been rooted in the equity and a commitment to supporting high quality education for multilingual learners. What we need to remember is that multilingual learners come from a wide range of cultural, linguistic, educational, and socioeconomic backgrounds, and have many physical, social, emotional, experiential, and/or cognitive differences. All students bring assets to learning, potential, and resources to schools that educators must leverage to increase equity in standards-based system. Integration of content and language, we know from a long time ago that that's the best way to learn language. So academic content is the context for language learning, and the reverse is that language is the means for learning academic content. Multilingual learners are not only decoders of language, but also language analysts and language users, but they're doing it in a language that in English, in a setting where English is the language taught or the language of instruction. Multilingual learners are doing it in a language that they have not mastered yet. Collaboration among stakeholders. When I talked about MTSS and the MTSS framework, I talked about the importance of collaboration. We know that it is paramount to the success of the language instruction educational program, the LIEP. Stakeholders share responsibility for educating multilingual learners and for English language development. It's crucial for the academic success of MLLs that both language and content teachers and administrators see themselves as responsible for fostering language development of multilingual learners and for systems to move away from the idea that ESL specialists alone should assume the sole responsibility for students' language development. And finally, functional approach to language development. This approach helps educators focus on the purposeful use of language. One metaphor for language is analogous and making the analogy that it's a toolbox containing different tools that are used to communicate, develop relationships, to act upon the world. Particular linguistic tools achieve certain purposes. So the explicit teaching of how language works can help multilingual learners expand what they can do with language, in so doing growing their language toolbox. As Paula shared earlier, amplify, don't simplify content for multilingual learners. The temptation for educators is to simplify the content rather than amplifying it. Many multilingual learners at the secondary level have been receiving ELD instruction since they were in kindergarten and are rarely asked to read a grade level text. Educators must provide classroom environments that foster deep and rich learning necessary for the development of 21st century competencies. So instead of simplification, educators need to design instructional activities and materials, lessons and units that provide opportunities to engage with rich, meaningful, and challenging language and content. Multilingual learners bring a wealth of resources. One thing that we need to keep harping and push if you are an ESL teacher is that multilingual learners are often spoken in the same sentence as struggling readers. And multilingual learners or English learners are not struggling readers, they're developing readers. They are learning to read in a language, in this case, English, that they have not mastered yet. When assets are viewed as resources and opportunity for development rather than deficits to overcome, multilingual learners are especially well suited to thrive in these kinds of instructional environments. Multilingual learners bring a wealth of resources beside the fact that they have access to 2 or more languages. They bring a nuanced perspective to to history and politics due largely to their multicultural and multinational backgrounds. Some may even belong to cultures that value collaboration. Some may exhibit high level of motivation, resilience, and self-reliance, often exhibited by immigrant families. And finally, many of them are able to access their whole linguistic and cultural repertoire when they are tackling new learning, communicating, and teaming. There is a paradigm shift that all teachers need to do, from perceived deficits to asset-based teaching, where we focus on what students know, what they can do, what are the skills, contributions, or experiences that would be useful for them or for the world, providing relevance and fostering great student engagement. When given the opportunity and supports to do so, multilingual learners can engage in productively with complex and challenging text and ideas in ways that teachers previously would not have thought possible. So I did a little segue on assets, but we're back to the WIDA ELD standards framework. We looked at the 4 big ideas and how they couch everything. They're like the foundation for the WIDA ELD standard framework. There are several pieces that stayed the same. For those of you who are familiar with the previous edition, those are the things that stayed the same. The can-do philosophy, the 5 original WIDA ELD standard statements, the 6th level of language proficiency, and the 6th grade level clusters. As you can see, the English language development standards remain as the foundation to the system, and they've stayed the same. What has been updated is the reorganization of the framework around 4 components that we will be examining in the next slide, and also providing grade level cluster materials that support the framework, that include the language functions and features and the annotated language samples. For those of you who have not seen it, it is a very extensive document. I don't know for sure if you can see this, but it's 387 pages. And as you can tell, I have tabbed it because there are several pieces to it. And so this webinar is not attempting to provide you with any in-depth professional development on the WIDA ELD standards, but only to give you an overview. This is probably the most important slide here because it shows you visually what is happening. The framework consists of the 4 components that I previously mentioned, ranging from broad to narrow in scope. So from the WIDA statement all the way to the proficiency level descriptors. The 5 WIDA ELD statements provide the broadest conceptual framing and illustrate the integration of language and content. The WIDA statements, standard statements show language use in the service of learning. In other words, language for thinking and doing. Then you have the 4 key language uses. By the way, these will be developed more broadly as we move down. And the way I see this, those 4 components is like the Russian nesting dolls, where the ELD statements is the biggest of the nesting doll, and then you move to the smallest one. I'm sorry. So the key language uses describe prominent ways that language is used in school across all disciplines. When educators make choices about how to integrate content and language, the key language uses can help provide focus and coherence. Then you have the language expectations. They're set goals for content-driven language learning. They add specificity to the ELD statements and key language uses and make visible the language associated with the content areas. The language expectations are the statements most similar to what educators generally find in academic content standards. And finally, the proficiency level descriptors describe a continuum of language development for activities that target language expectations. They provide a detailed articulation of how students might develop language across the 6 levels of English language proficiency. And all of these together work to make a comprehensive picture of language development. So for me, this is also an important slide because for those who are familiar with the previous standards, the abbreviated version of the standard statements is ELD Standard 1. Language of you that used to be of was replaced by the word for all of the standard statements. ELD has been clarified. As ESL teachers, I teach the language for the content areas. I am not a content teacher providing language supports and scaffolds. So I'm helping students learn the language for social and instructional purposes, the language for language arts, the language for mathematics, the language for science, and the language for social studies. Here are the 4 key uses that I mentioned earlier. And what those, you're probably, for those of you who have been in ESL or ELD long enough, probably remember those key language uses. They've been updated for this version of this edition of the English Language Development Standards. They're now narrate, inform, explain, and argue. Those key language uses emerged from an analysis of content standards, language development standards, instructional materials, and a review of the literature in various fields of linguistics and language education. The KLUs, would you believe, another acronym. The KLUs represent genre families that appear across all content areas and that teachers can use to prioritize and organize the integration of content and language. Key language uses exemplify the big ideas of a functional approach to language development. They emphasize language use for particular purposes with particular audiences and in particular sociocultural contexts. All key language uses are present across all grade levels and disciplines. But at each grade level cluster and discipline, some will be more prominent than others. Even the listening, speaking, and reading and writing has been updated. In the language expectations, the 4 individual language domains that we were familiar with in previous editions have been consolidated into 2 more inclusive modes of communication: interpretive and expressive. The interpretive mode, communication mode, encompasses listening, reading, and viewing. The expressive mode, communication mode, encompasses speaking, writing, and representing. These 2 broader modes of communication, interpretive and expressive, increase accessibility options for students and emphasize multimodal forms of communication. It's not only listening, speaking, and reading and writing. Students are now exposed to multiliteracies and need to be, in addition to the use of spoken and written language, students also need to communicate through gestures, facial expressions, images, equations, maps, symbols, diagrams, charts, videos, graphs, computer-mediated and other means. By underscoring the multimodal nature of both language development, content area learning, the 2020 edition of the WIDA English Language Development Standards Framework is seeking to increase educators' awareness of the multifaceted ways in which multilingual learners communicate and construct meaning. So we've looked at language expectations in general. Let's look at 1 grade level cluster language expectation. So we, as we said before, the key use here is inform. So we chose the grade level cluster grade 2-3 to focus on the key language use inform and to look at what are the language expectations at that grade level cluster for the inform key use. So language expectations are goals for content-driven language instruction. They are similar, again, they are similar to what educators generally find in academic content standards. I know that this is very small. That is why we provided you with the folder so that you could, if you wanted, look at the follow in the standards on page 87 to find this page here. So what they are showing you is we'd like to call your attention to 3 aspects of language expectations: the grade level cluster, the key use, which is inform, the communication mode. So if you're looking here, you see the interpretive communication mode versus the expressive communication mode. Then they dig deeper, they drill deeper and provide you with a list of language functions and sample language features that would be needed to teach as you consider the key language use of inform. So it's the common patterns of language use that students might use to meet the purpose of schooling. For example, a series of language functions is associated with the process of constructing fictional narratives, informing peers of newly gained knowledge, explaining phenomena, engaging in scientific argumentation. Then to carry the particular language functions, language users rely on various language resources, including language features that are right here. All right. So for example, different types of sentences, clauses, phrases, and words. Together, the language functions and features form a dynamic and illustrative set that shows some of the ways language works in service of content learning. So again, we're drilling down. We went from the key language uses to the language expectations to now looking and language functions and features to looking at grade level cluster proficiency level descriptors. This is brand new. This is, to me, well, brand new in the sense of being that developed. So we for the sake of time, we took just one cluster, and we decided, I've got to hide the floating media control. We chose the grade level 4-5 just so that you would see something different. We're looking at the interpretive communication mode for listening, reading, and viewing. Remember, interpretive communication mode, it's listening and reading, and now we have viewing. It's look at the criteria. We're looking from word phrase level to sentence level to discourse level. And then it follows the continuum of the 6 levels of proficiency embraced by WIDA. So at the end of level 1, multilingual learners are going to be able to do the following. At the end of level 2, so on and so forth. So it focuses on ideas, on coherent texts, on meanings that are extended or enhanced through. So it's way more complex than it was before. And definitely we're not giving the attention that it needs in this short webinar. So now we have the expressive mode and mode of communication. And Again, it follows the same patterns. Focus on discourse as well as sentence and word frames as it looks at speaking, writing, and representing. And the bottom line is to remind ourselves that even though English multilingual learners are able to do at end of level one, the ability to write in sentence fragments and emerging use of simple sentences with supports, scaffolds that scaffold up rather than down, the multilingual learners are going to be able to show what they know. So this ends our short overview of the WIDA ELD standards framework. Now, what I would like to ask you is if you would be so kind to go in to the chat and tell us who do you think is responsible for implementing the WIDA ELD standards framework within instruction and assessment. Is it the ESL teachers? Is it the content classroom teachers, or both? So if you want to just put 1, 2, or 3 in the chat, that would be great. And Paula, if you would be so kind as to tell me what is the overwhelming response to that, that would be great.
The overwhelming response to that is 3, both.
Okay, and which is the right answer, ladies and gentlemen, and I'm sorry, I've just said something binary for folks that are in the audience. So so what I would like you to do that now is to consider the fact that do you sense in your school that you do know that it is both ESL teachers and content teachers that need to address the WIDA ELD standards, but in reality, is it truly what is going on? And I would venture to say that it's mostly expected from the ESL teacher. So we found this wonderful short article from California looking at the ELA-ELD framework for instruction. And we thought it would be good to address the differences between designated ELD instruction and integrated ELD instruction. They're really like the left and right hand of ELD instruction because you can't have one without the other. Every school needs to implement both components in order for every multilingual learners to be successful in school. Instructional differences between the two can be summarized focusing on the following 3 areas: time, focus, and standards. So designated ELD would be what we consider ESL or targeted by an ESL specialist, or ELD provided by the ESL specialist. Integrated ELD is what is occurring within regular classes in all content areas when the student is not with the ESL teacher. The focus is different. The focus in the integrated ELD focus on the content of the lesson with language supports, while in the designated ELD classroom, the focus is on language skills using content from regular curriculum to support the language skills. And finally, the focus for standards in an integrated ELD classroom is the state content standards in tandem with the WIDA ELD standards, where the designated ELD focus on the WIDA ELD standards. I will not go through all of those slides because I'm seeing that time is fritting away, but I wanted to show you the difference at different grades. So what does integrated ELD looks like in 2nd grade, 3rd grade, 4th grade, while designated ELD with an ESL specialist would focus on those areas. Now we're segueing into, we've looked at knowing our students. We have looked at how to ensure that what we teach is at the right level of English language proficiency with the necessary supports, amplifying language, amplifying the content. And we're going to transition to how language and literacy work together. And Anna will address that with you.
Okay, thank you, Francine.
You're welcome.
Next. Okay, one piece that is very important when we talk about instruction is considering the fact that not everybody that is in front of these children really understand the process of second language acquisition. And one piece that is important for us ESL educators is to find enough resources so we can help our content teachers to understand why it is so important to stress the fact that when you have English learners at different levels of English language proficiency, language instruction cannot just stop once the student leaves the ELD instruction time. So we have a little YouTube film that we are not going to show you, but we are offering this as a resource for you to really take a look at that, because this really shows in math instruction, how come one word can actually either support the concept development of a child who is a second language learner, or actually really confuse the child and then the concept will not be developed. The word really in discussion is block. When a child is asked to look at a problem about how many blocks a student will have to walk to get to the grocery store or some other place, the student is thinking about constructing blocks, you know, like blocks that you put together to create a geometric figure. So block really in the problem, the math problem was talking about, you know, the distance. Well, for that student, it was the same word, but with a different meaning. So that's how important it is to really watch and see how we need to consider the fact of vocabulary instruction in all, through all content areas as part of the key uses and the development of the communication skills necessary to really tackle information, ideas, and concepts, because that is what our standards are all about. Next. And just because we have information, ideas, and concepts that these students need to learn how to communicate, we need to look at language very carefully, because not all of us really understand the process of second language acquisition and how language is developed, even though we have professionals who have been in the field of ESL or have actually looked at the field from the perspective of all the different content areas. We need to understand that the goal or the most important piece that we communicate in all of that Francine really presented to you about language development is the fact that language really needs to be taught from the perspective of form, content, and use. And that is exactly what you're going to find in the standards. Maybe if somebody would like to actually make it very simple to understand the standards and the key uses in all of those 383 pages that you have really focus on the development of form, content, and use. That's exactly what they do. The only way that is a little, different is the statements in how you really measure or how you really focus some of these language use through the 4 different components of narrate, inform, explain, and argue. So if we look at phonology, morphology, and syntax, we have to teach that. Children do not really come up with all of these phonology, morphology, and syntax from a second language. as part of their repertoire. So we need to focus our attention on those elements throughout our instruction. Why? Because we need to focus on that content that we use to teach the form, to teach the uses. So that is so important that we look at our job as ESL teachers very different from literacy instruction. Okay, so that is why we have to be able to explain what do we do. One of the questions that we always ask teachers is, so what do ESL teachers teach? That is a very good question for all of you to just think about it before you even look at the book of the new 2020 standards, because that is going to tell you exactly what you need to do. And that, remember, this is not the 2020 ESL standards document is not a curriculum. Just, to get away from the idea that, oh, I'm going to use this as you can't, because the standards have been explained in a very, as Francine has really presented, in a very general way. Now, how do you really target level 1, level 2, level 3, level 4? That is not set there. Actually, you have to actually figure out how are you going to do that with language use. That's the beauty of being a curriculum developer, is knowing how you're going to stage each of those components. Next, please. And going back to literacy, actually the connection, the rope, please. Okay, thank you. The connection of those 3 circles that I just showed you is also, transfer to how do we look at literacy development with English learners. In as much as our colleagues who dwell in the area of teaching literacy to native speakers really emphasize the development of phonics and phonemic awareness and the sound system of the language is something that is, very important to decode. We have to actually say that, yes, it is also important for ELs, but the sequence in when you teach that is different. Why? Because ELs are not proficient in the language that you're trying to teach them, something so abstract as it is a sound. Okay, so there are sounds that don't even exist in the native language of the child. Needless to say that you're going to emphasize by repeat, 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 because the child will be able to actually, produce the sound, but then here, the brain is not going to be able to comprehend when they read. Many ELs become very good decoders, but they cannot comprehend what they are reading. Why? Because they missed. Look at the rope. The rope has multiple strands. And if we forget to really do some of the strands, we are not going to have, as they say there, skilled readers. So if we do not do the language comprehension as part of your instruction in your ESL class and in your literacy instruction, we are going to be missing a very hefty component of the famous Scarborough rope. So if you believe in the rope, please look at the language comprehension, because that's where children need to dwell first to be able to do the word recognition. Okay, so yes, it is important. We are not saying that in the science of reading, phonology or phonics is not important. We are saying, yes, in the science of reading, phonology is important to be explicitly taught for native speakers. When we heard authors who come from Texas or come from other states where bilingual education or dual language programs are really, the norm rather than the exception, as we have here in Pennsylvania, we hear them talking about the science of reading, but they are talking about the science of reading when they teach Spanish, okay? When they teach Spanish, yes, because that's the language of the child brings that language. But be aware that when you're teaching to read, as in this rope, in a second language, you have to really have the hook of that comprehension before you jump into the abstract that is the sound system. Why? Because English is morphophonemic. I will stop there. Look at the word in the dictionary. Morphophonemic. I don't have time to explain that. Next. Why is it important? Why do we stress language comprehension? Because it's through background knowledge that actually students start to develop that sense of language use. How do we use languages when we discuss something about background knowledge? Even pointing at a picture, even using one word in your whiteboard, even just, filling in the blanks. You are developing that background knowledge, following those pictures, looking at how you are going to connect the child to the reading. Vocabulary, very important. What are the key words that I am going to really focus so I can discuss the words, so I can make them familiar, so when I tackle text later on, they will be able to comprehend. How am I going to really look at syntax, semantics registers? How syntax is so important. That's part of the language features that WIDA now is addressing for the first time in regards to how do we use language. Verbal reasoning, how do I get there? Why do I think that this is what the author is trying to tell me? How do I reason with that when I have very little language? That's what Paula really stressed about scaffolds, and that's so important. Literacy knowledge, genre. How do I understand what is the difference between a narrative and an informational text when I am looking at both? We need to teach that explicitly. Okay, so that is so important. Concepts of print for some of our students who come from languages that do not have a similar alphabet, right? They have characters like Mandarin, Korean. Okay, so that is important to also consider. Next. And the research, thank God for research, at Harvard, actually, Dr. Noni Lasso, who directs the program, the literacy, the educational department in Harvard, really looked at two ways to look at literacy development with English learners. The rope already was right there, but she actually called them the code-based skills and the meaning-based skills. And that is so important because for our children, meaning-based skills are the hook for the code-based skills. So please, please consider the fact that our children do not bring that proficiency in that English language that is required to actually develop those code-based skills. We need to consider that as a fact. And it is not that we are against teaching phonics in our ESL, as part of our ESL instruction, but we cannot teach it first. That's the problem. We cannot drill it first. We have to develop the meaning-based skills, and once they get familiar with the text and the story, then we can drill down. And I will show you that in the lesson. Next. And this is a little bit more information about what are meaning-based skills and, how do they play a role when we talk about second language learners. We know that it is very important that oral language discourse precedes actually comprehension. We need to talk about the stories. We need to support our students in using language. And that is why meaning-based skills is so important, because in our new standards framework, language use is the most important feature that you can take a look. And how do you do that? It's by creating activities in which students are using language, not just listening to the teacher or repeating things 2,000 times. We are not changing brains just by repeating something. We change brains when students start using that new language and they become bilinguals. That's how we change brains. Next, please. So there is, a distinction between that. If you look at the rope, if you look at the other graphic that we have from Noni Lasso, you are going to understand that the brain actually, with code-based skills and meaning-based skills, works, very much towards really acquiring the language and acquiring those literacy skills so necessary for the success of our students. Next, please, Francine. So how do we develop a model of literacy for our elementary students that really looks for that balance, that really looks for helping our students not only develop the language necessary for them to be successful in content areas, but also helps them move towards reading at grade level that is so important for our students. We need to actually support that oral language development and support that meaning-based skills in order to help them develop the skills necessary to use language in the classroom when they are in ELD, and also to use language once they are in the content areas and being able to actually express themselves in that concept development. Next. So what evidence-based practices help multilingual learners develop language and literacy? So you see that there are many articles now, which I really appreciate that research is really going now in our direction. And if you look at, we were talking about Dr. Aida Walke at the beginning. There is even now a grant that was that West Ed has, in which they are developing what are the best strategies and how they can guide the field to support English learners at the secondary level. And there's a lot of research also attached. Dr. Noni Lasso is doing a lot of work also in the area of developing literacy with English learners. So we were looking at this article from Edutopia, and we were looking at, okay, so what are really some of the high quality, or how can we look at high quality reading instruction? And one piece is looking at the cognitive needs of our students, excuse me. So are we really looking at grade level standards also? Because that is the other thing. When we look at our standards, the WIDA standards, and we look at the language uses that are expressed there, all of those language uses are very much connected to what is required for students to learn at grade level. So that is the connection. But you also need, as an ESL teacher, you also need to collaborate with the content teacher and see what is happening in the classroom and how you can align what you're going to be doing in your class with those grade level standards that you are going to be enforcing, enhancing, and developing through language use. So cognitive needs are very important, and we need to know that setting high expectations is going to be the norm, not the exception, but also setting high support for our students, because high expectations with no supports, there's going to be a lot of frustration and your kids will not learn. So what are some of the things that they are saying as supports? Native language resources, very important. Strategic use of first language is important. Visuals, gestures, opportunities to listen and speak with peers. That's exactly what we are saying when we say, meaning-based skills. Talk. Children need to be talking to one another in your classrooms. It's not just teacher talk. It has to be children talking to one another. Using formulaic expressions for speaking and writing. Remember, formulaic expressions are very important to not only support students to continue a conversation, but also to help them put together their ideas. Words like we have used before, some formulaic expressions like in my opinion, then blah, 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 they can add the other component. Content and language objectives, that's it. That is why you have to look at your language use components of the standards. That's where you're going to get your language objectives, because in the language features, That's where you have the language objectives for each of those components. Next.
Anna, 15 minutes.
Next. And we also have some affective needs that you can actually go over. But I'm just going to say something about building a strong classroom community. That's very important. We all are in this second grade classroom and we all are together in the classroom. That is very important, not just single out like, Mrs. Diaz kids, the ELs go over there, that creates a sense that these children do not belong. Next. We have talked a lot about the linguistic needs. Actually, when we look at the standards, when we look at the importance of putting together the code-based skills and the content-based skills, we are looking at those linguistic needs. The form, functions, and content circles also look at those needs. Next. Okay. One piece that is important, and before we even go into the lesson, is explicit instruction. That is so important because more and more we are relying on audiovisuals and we are relying on little clips, which is important, but you also need to teach explicitly some of the skills that these children need to learn, okay? Many opportunities to practice, that's when you use language, when you are asking students to talk to one another, when there is peer interaction, when there is an environment that fosters those, important conversations. Next. I think we are going to get into the lesson. Okay. Now we're going to get into the lesson. I hope that we have enough time for that. Next. Our lesson actually has been developed using this lesson template. This lesson template is nothing new for us. We have been promoting this for the past, 4 or 5 years. We have been using this template the first time we look at language use, but also, through Aida Walke in many of her trainings, she really believes that in order to tackle text that is in the middle, right, you need to actually develop activities that are going to empower students and make them feel comfortable at tackling text before you need to activate prior knowledge with activities connecting with the text, focusing attention on concept development, on that vocabulary. This story is going to be about blah, blah, blah. And this is what you're going to see. How many of you have ever seen this? Creating that environment for that meaning-based skills development. Once you tackle text, depending on the level of your English language proficiency, you are going to be helping them deconstruct text, but also understanding it by chunking it. Remember, by pieces, rather than a whole bunch of words that they don't understand. And you need to also navigate that with them, model students in how to do that, and then establishing connections between the ideas from the text, their own ideas, and also the ideas that others have about the text. The extending understanding is actually what activities have you planned after the text has been read. And that is so important because we cannot just read the text and talk about it and then goodbye. Tomorrow, another thing. No, we have to go deeper into what are they going to really create after the text. And then at the end, you have in blue, micro skills, sentence structure, vocabulary, word analysis, phonics. That's when that component comes, is using the text that they already know you're going to teach these other code-based skills. Next.
I'm working on it.
Okay, for the lesson, we selected a book that is very well known, and it's from an author who actually was a refugee. When he was 4 or 5 years old, he lived in different countries due to his status of a refugee. And throughout his travels, he started to, create stories about his life. The first part in How I Learned Geography is about his story when he was a refugee. He was only 5 and his parent went shopping. And then when he came back, he brought a map instead of food. And so that gave him the opportunity to look at a map and start imagining all of these places. So that could be something that is related to students who are not only refugees, but who had to move from their country here, or maybe from one environment to the other. Next. You can see it in that YouTube there. So it's a beautiful book. We have tried it even with older students. It really works. So when I look at the book, I look at my standards, my PA ELA standards, and I pull from the PA ELA standards and really try to focus my instruction also on those standards. Engage effectively in a range of collaborative discussions. I mean, I don't have to tell you about the standards. You know that I am going to be doing speaking and listening, reading, and then writing. That is also reflected in our core standards. Next. I also look at my 2020 WIDA ELD standards and the key uses. I was going to focus on narrate, okay, for my grade cluster 2-3, because that is, my students came from those grades. And I look at what will be the most important pieces when I do my work with the students, and then share ideas about one's own and others' lived experiences, connect stories with images, ask questions about what they have shared, recount and restate ideas. So that is so important. And discuss how stories might end or next steps. Because the important part of this story is that it lends itself to all of that discussion. Next. I also look at not only the part that talks about narrative, but I also look at not only at the part that talks about the reading component, the listening, reading, and viewing, but I also look at the interpretive part. Why? Because a story without the interpretive part is really, a waste of your time, because the kids are ready now to express themselves. So I look at identifying a central message from key details and identifying how character, attributes, and actions contribute to event sequences. This story really lends itself to all of that. Next.
5 minutes.
I also look at the audience to context, and also develop story with time and event sequences and complications, resolutions, or ending. Because after reading that story, the students are asked to write their own story based on what this child wrote about himself. Next. The first part, this is to activate prior knowledge. I ask some of these questions. I ask the student to relate to something that they are going to read about. So that is really connecting the student to text. Rather than just opening the book and boys and girls, we're going to read about this, I also looked at the connection. And really, that for me is something meaning-based skill that is important, not only for ELs, but for all children. But in this case, my ELs need this big time. Next. Then I asked them also to predict. If they look at the book and they look at How I Learned Geography, and geography is such a powerful word, I also use it to do some of the, investigating the word geography. What other words they have seen that look like that? So anyway, I asked them to really look at what do they think the story is going to be about. And we share our ideas. Language use. Next. We look at a map because the story is very much about a map. So we look at the map of the world, and I ask them to identify the United States, and where they come from. Or even, if we look at a map of Pennsylvania, because I also had to have that. I had many kids that are from Pennsylvania. So we will also like to get the students to connect with the word map and what a map looks like. You know, second and third graders really dwell into the map skills that they need in other, you know, in the social studies component.
Anna, I apologize for interrupting, but we have 2 minutes. So I'm thinking you're going to have to get to the code for people to leave on time.
Oh,
I mean,
that's
not
a
right
shame.
now,
Because,
not right now, but at least
yeah,
going to the end of the presentation.
okay. All right. Well, the lesson is there for you to take a look. If you have any questions about the lesson, because I really did this following what you need to be doing in your in developing this lesson. And the important part of this is really to help you create activities. So you, before you even go into the text, you have students excited about the book. Then once you are reading, you don't read just once. You have to give opportunities for students to read, you know, with you, choral reading. The book does not have a lot of text, but the pictures are very powerful. So later on, I scaffolded my level 1s and 2s to write their own story, because the story is really about a child. So now I want to learn about them. So I scaffolded for my lower level students to write their own stories. Okay, next. Then I went, after a week that we did this, I went into the orthography, vocabulary, phonics, sentence formation, sentence combining, and syntax. I did that using text, the text that they learned from the geography, how I learned geography. Next. And I expanded vocabulary. I used papayas, mangoes, a lot of other things. Sentence structure, verb to be, I am, you are, he, she, it is. We did that with their national origin. And then syntax, we combine sentences using but and and. So personal pronouns are important for my level 1s and 2s, 3s and 4s sometimes need a reminder. That was good. In orthography and phonics, I use initial consonant patterns, CVC, short A, very important for my ELs. They need to learn short vowel sounds. That's what I did, okay? I did some dialogues later on where they have to use the map and ask questions to one another. So as you see, I used the lesson plan template and all of my activities are there. This is how you implement the standards that we have now. It is not something that is impossible to do. If you go over what we have in our checklist, we develop a checklist. Paula Zucker developed this checklist for you to make sure during implementation that you are doing it with fidelity. Look at your checklist, see what you're doing. I don't know, you know, we are going to be doing another lesson for the secondary. If you are with us for that, we will make sure that all the fluff at the beginning will be a little less so we can go and do all of these lessons, because the lesson is the heart of this presentation. Okay, thank you. Sorry we didn't have enough time to go over everything, but any questions that you may have, send them to Francine. You have her information there. And we also want you to go to, where is that slide that you said that they have to go? Francine? Okay, if you want to receive Act 48, please go into that link and it must be completed no later than May 21st. And for any questions, you have to send an email to Tina. Thank you very much. I am sorry that we couldn't do the lesson completely. Sometimes, you know, our webinars are, you know, we want to give you so much and the time sometimes works against us. But thank you. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you so much, Anna. Just if you would like to take a picture of this slide, I will stay on for a few minutes in case you have any questions. Thank you for joining us. We hope that you will join us next week. We will focus on a secondary lesson at this time, and obviously we will make some adjustments so that it it doesn't get shortened at the end for you. So please, if you are a Pennsylvania teacher and you would like to receive Act 48, please complete the online survey, and it has to be completed no later than May 21st. And if you have questions, please contact Tina Reif at trife@patent.net. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. Have a good evening.